Hey y'all, thank you for joining me on another video. Um, I'm getting better. It's only been a week. I'm actually gonna try something a little bold and see if I can step up my game and get videos twice a week. Don't know how successful I'll be, but I'm gonna try. Won't be successful if I don't try at all. So here's hoping. So, in keeping with the theme for this month of domestic violence awareness, I want to talk about um, why a victim chooses their abuser. Because a lot of people don't understand how a victim or a survivor would allow themselves to remain in that position. And I would imagine it is hard for someone who's never dealt with domestic abuse to understand. Because I remember thinking way back, um, before I got involved with my ex, or as I was involved with my ex, but before the actual abuse really started, or I should say before it became obvious to me, is that I often said I would never let anybody disrespect me like that. If they lay hands on me, that's it, we're done. And I hear that so many times. Oh, I would never let myself be disrespected like that. I would never let anybody disrespect me like that. But here's the thing, you don't. It's not that you're letting them, it's that you don't understand that you can leave from it, or that it is abuse. For many, many years, what I endured, um, I didn't consider abuse. I look back and it's like, oh my goodness. Now, the me I am now would never put up with that. But I was a different person back then. I was a person that had already been groomed by her biological father to be submissive to men, to that it was my job to take care of men. And I always believed it was my job to take care of my husband. Um, and though it's not my mom's fault at all, I saw how much of a servant attitude she had towards my stepdad, whom I do refer to as dad. Um, and so I took that to mean that it was my duty. I realize now that mom served dad because she loved him, and that he served her just as much. I mean, in dad's eyes, my mother could do no wrong. He loved her dearly, and to the day he passed away, he referred to her as his bride. Um, but I didn't see that part. I only saw the part where my mom was had such a servant heart for him. But again, it was because she loved him and because she felt loved. I served him, my ex, out of obligation because I thought it was my duty as a wife to take care of her husband. And though there's some truth to that, I didn't realize that it's supposed to be reciprocated, or that it is reciprocated in a healthy marriage. Um, I've been asked once or twice, or 3 or 4 times, what attracted me to him. And I've discussed it in previous videos about how he acted like he stepped out of a Hallmark movie. I mean, the way we met and everything was, I don't think even Hallmark would have written a story about it because it was so cheesy. We met through a mutual friend during a time where I wasn't really looking. Um, I had gotten out of a relationship, ironically enough, with a guy that was very, very narcissistic. Um, he he a narcissist? Was he an actual narcissist? I don't know. But at best, he had narcissistic tendencies because the guy I dated before I met my ex could literally charm the fuzz off a peach. I have said that so many times. And he could have, because he was dating me and someone very, very close to me, all the while convincing me he wasn't dating her, convincing her he wasn't dating me. And he was doing it right in front of our faces. So I had just gotten out of that relationship. I finally realized that, yeah, no, it's not me he likes. It's the fact that he can use me to get what he wants, to put his hands on my body. And I said, no, I'll cut it off. So I was taking time, just having fun, when, in true New Orleans fashion, Mardi Gras season had started, and it was the first parade of the season in a suburb of New Orleans called Metairie. Metairie is literally next door to New Orleans. Here's New Orleans, here's Metairie. And a friend of mine, well, former friend now, but that's a whole other story in and of itself. But a friend of mine then called me up at work because I didn't have a phone at my house because my biological father didn't feel the need for the phone. Again, a whole other story. Um, and said, hey, look, I'm going to the parade tonight. You want to come with? Yeah, sure. Because I wanted to go to the parade, but I wasn't going to go by myself. And then he said, well, I'm bringing a friend with me. Do you mind if he comes? Admittedly, all I could think of was, I'll have 2 guys, one on each arm. I'm going to have the girls jealous of me. So I said, yeah, sounds good. Because I knew the friend turned out to eventually become my now ex. Because I was very good friends with his sister. But we never seemed to connect. Well, that night we did. The moment I laid eyes on him, I thought, okay, I'm liking what I'm seeing. And acting very chivalrous. That night, of course, the parade got rained out, so we ended up not being able to go, and we were stuck at the friend's house. So in between the rain, we went to the convenience store, got some frozen pizza and some beer, and went back to the house. And the whole time, my now ex was going on, I don't let anybody pay for me unless I pay them back. You, I'm not going to drink this beer unless you promise me you're going to let me pay you back. And I'm like, well, you don't have to. I bought it for all of us. It's okay. And he's like, no, I mean it. I'm not going to drink it. I don't take anything from a girl unless I pay the girl back. Okay, fine. You can pay me back. And the whole night he was acting very chivalrous, very considerate, typical Southern man of being polite and courteous. Um, we talked all night about all kinds of things. And I'm thinking, I like this because I was always interested in intelligence. I loved a good conversation. And we had a great conversation talking about so many different things. And that's what started me considering, him. But then it took a couple of months for us to get connected, and when we finally did, just when we had planned on trying to go out on a date together to go see a movie, I get raped. And there was no way I could live in the house with my father, the house that I was raped in, because the individual, if you haven't seen previous videos, I've talked about the individual had been stalking me for at least a few months, as near as I can tell now, and broke into my house knowing where they could break in that I wouldn't hear them and rape me. So I wanted to move up to Nebraska with my mom and my dad, knowing where I'd be safe and I could heal. And I didn't want to tell him at first why I was moving up there because I was embarrassed and there was a stigma. Well, he weaseled it out of me because I just said it's a family emergency. It was like, what family emergency? What? Pushed and pushed till I finally told him. And then he said, do you know what this joker looks like? And I said, yeah, I could right down to the gold on his tooth. And he said, well, I'm going to grab a few of the friends, and he named those friends. You're going to be in the car with us, and you're going to be completely safe. You're going to point him out, and I'm going to pummel him. Except he said worse. Well, that took me aback, because here we hardly knew each other. We had only been talking for a month or two. I would call him. I would borrow my neighbor's phone and call him. And here he's wanting to protect me like that. Obviously, I didn't let him know that what area the guy lived in or anything. I said, no, let the police handle it. They're doing their best right now. But that got me, because it was like I was being given, or the appearance of being given, what I didn't have in my biological father. And that was protection. I craved it from the time I was little, but I never felt completely safe. Because anytime he protected me, it was only because it protected his interests. That maybe in a different video, because that's a whole other hour discussion. So that was the first thing he gave me that I craved, and that's what started the process of me falling for him. And then, as I've discussed in other videos, what made my heart fall for him hook, line, and sinker was when I was planning on moving back down to New Orleans, but of course I couldn't live in the same house as my father, and where I was victimized. And so we were going to move in together, and I said, okay, will it be a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom? And he said, well, I know you're not, because of the rape, you probably aren't into intimacy right now, so it'll be 2 bedrooms until you're ready to come into my bedroom. I do not know a female alive that wouldn't fall for that. Nowadays I wouldn't, because I would see through it. But I was young. I was 22, not quite 23. And in some ways, I was mature in some ways and not mature in others. So I fell for it. And then he said everything right. When I literally fell in love with him over the phone. And the day after my birthday, I told him I love you first. False courage of Colorado Bulldogs drinks, which I don't think I've drunk one since. And then he told me he loved me and claimed that I was the first person he ever told that to, and that he had been wanting to tell me, but he didn't want to scare me off. Now, pretty sure I know better. But this is how he was. He was charming, chivalrous, protective. I were to come to realize that later that protectiveness was actually controlling, but I didn't know that then. He was sweet, would not cuss in front of me. Dang near pummeled my 17-year-old brother's friend for just cussing in front of me, not even cussing at me. Everything a woman wants in a guy, in a fantasy type thing. And that's what I fell in love with. It wasn't until after we got married and after I had our firstborn that there was changes happening. But they were so subtle, I didn't see them at first. And then when I started seeing changes, I started thinking it was all my fault, because that's what they do. Because they never take accountability for anything. It's always their victim's fault. If I was a better wife, or I looked better, or bazillion other things. But the biggest thing is I didn't choose the abuser. I chose the mask. I chose what he chose to show me, and I believed it. I didn't have a reason to not believe it because I was not familiar with this kind of evilness. And it's just, it leaves me kind of taken aback sometimes because it's still hard to fathom that the abuse was on purpose. It wasn't, it was a way of controlling. It was a way of getting me back for being what he's not. I mean, I know all of this now, but I didn't know it back then. And so therefore I believe that it was all me, that somehow it was my fault, that somehow I was the common denominator. Because in public he was sweet, helpful, would help anybody that needed it. We were capable, if we had the ability to help them, bam, he was right on it. So I figured it had to be something with me. I would say like the last 2 or 3 years, I started realizing it wasn't me. That at first I started realizing that, okay, I know I'm not perfect. I know that I can be a handful, but ultimately he has some fault in this. And that I knew I didn't deserve to be emotionally or physically abused. But I still put some of the fault on myself. And y'all, I'll be the first to say I was not perfect. And I would, way back then, especially when we first got married, I was definitely not wife of the year material by any stretch. I had a lot of baggage I came with. But doesn't mean that I deserve to be abused. And once I started realizing that, that's when I started realizing I need to leave. Because my kids didn't deserve it and I didn't deserve it. And that's when I started loosely formulating a plan. And then in the end of August of 2019 was when I made the decision, okay, it's not a matter of if I leave, it's a matter of when. And I started coming up with a plan. And that's what I do training now. I train others, the new hires in my company, in domestic violence. And one of the things I tell them is if you get a client that is dealing with domestic abuse and they haven't left yet, they can't just up and leave. You don't leave an abuser, you escape. And that's what I did, even though I used the police to help me escape, which that's what they're there for. But I escaped. And that's what happens with a victim. They don't leave, they escape. No victim chooses to be abused. It may seem like it, but ultimately there's so many things going on in their minds as to why they don't leave. Because they're scared, because they don't think they're able to live on their own. They have kids and they're trying to protect the kids because at that point it's safer to live with the abuser than it is to be on her own, because the abuser could actually try to kidnap the kids. Unfortunately, that is a thing. So hopefully I've been able to give you a little bit of an insight on why a person chooses who they do that eventually becomes an abuser. Because I assure you, they don't abuse the person at first. They put on the charm, and what the victim chooses is the mask. They don't choose the abuse. Well, you guys have a good day. Stay blessed, and hopefully see you Wednesday.